I used to think I had a solid marriage with Jessica. We had been together for 6 years, and on the surface, everything seemed perfect. We had a nice little bungalow in the suburbs of Denver, 2 dogs, and a routine that felt comfortable. But lately, things had begun to feel off. I noticed Jessica spending more time on her phone, whispering or quickly closing apps when I walked into the room. She'd suddenly started dressing up more for her book club nights, wearing outfits that were clearly too nice for just a gathering of friends. At first, I chalked it up to the monotony of our life together. I figured she was just trying to spice things up, or maybe she wanted to impress her friends. But deep down, I sensed something was brewing. One evening, I came home early from work, a rare occurrence for me, and I found her in the living room. She was on the phone, and when she heard the door, she literally jumped, hurriedly hanging up and giving me a tight-lipped smile. It felt like she was hiding something, but I pushed it aside, convincing myself I was being paranoid. That paranoia peaked. A week later, when I found a receipt for a fancy dinner at a restaurant she claimed she'd never been to. The receipt had 2 meals and 2 glasses of wine on it, but she swore she'd been working late again. I don't even know why I didn't confront her right away. Maybe I was terrified of what the truth might be. Instead, I started keeping tabs, sneaking glances at her phone when she left it unattended, checking her location when she went out. It felt like I was becoming someone I didn't want to be, yet I needed answers. The real kicker came one Saturday morning. I was out walking the dogs when I passed by our landlord's house, Mr. Thompson. He was a bit of a sleazeball, always making inappropriate jokes. But that day, I saw Jessica's car parked in front of his place, and my heart dropped. I don't know what drove me to do it, but I walked up to the window and peered inside. What I saw turned my world upside down. Jessica was there, sitting on the couch with Mr. Thompson, and they were laughing, clearly too comfortable. Then it happened, they kissed. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My mind raced as I stumbled back, barely managing to catch my breath. I spent the next hour walking the dogs in a daze, my thoughts swirling. How could she do this to me? My heart felt heavy with betrayal, anger, and disbelief. When I finally got home, I was a storm of emotions. The reality that the love of my life was cheating on me with a man who was supposed to be looking out for us filled me with rage. I confronted her that evening after she got home. I remember the look on her face when I asked her about Mr. Thompson. She immediately went on the defensive. "What are you talking about?" she blurted, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. When I laid out the evidence, the receipt, the lies, the kiss, I thought she'd crumble, but instead she tried to spin a story that was so absurd it felt like a bad movie. I was just helping him with some paperwork. He needed my expertise, and we were celebrating his deal. She exclaimed, her voice rising. I could hardly process her excuses. I could see the guilt in her eyes, but she was so good at lying that I almost doubted my own eyes. At that moment, the weight of her betrayal crashed down on me. I had never felt such a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, but also a strange sense of determination. I didn't want to be the victim in this situation. I wanted to take control. As I processed everything, I started to formulate a plan for my revenge. I was done being the nice guy. I was going to reclaim my life, and I knew just how to do it. The thought of breaking free from her deception was empowering. No more lying and cheating. It was time for me to take a stand. I began to plot my next steps, knowing that I couldn't let her continue to manipulate me. I would show her the consequences of her actions, and it would start with securing my own future. The days following the confrontation were agonizing. Jessica continued to act like everything was normal, as if I hadn't just shattered her web of lies. I could see her trying to play the victim, feigning ignorance, and throwing in a few teary-eyed apologies to keep the peace. But I was no longer interested in her empty words. I had crossed into a new territory, one where I was determined to reclaim my life and get my revenge. For the first time since I discovered the affair, I found clarity. I'd been toying with the idea of buying a house of my own for a while, something to call my own without her involvement. I had been hesitant, thinking of our home as a shared space, but now it felt like a prison. I began researching properties that were within my budget. Each listing I looked at fueled my resolve. In my mind, I could see the life I wanted without her. As I scoured the real estate websites, I stumbled upon a quaint little house on the outskirts of a nearby neighborhood. It was modest but had a yard for the dogs and a garage where I could tinker with my hobbies. Most importantly, it was just far enough away from Jessica to feel like a clean break. I set up a viewing, fully aware that this was a pivotal moment in my plan. Meanwhile, Jessica continued her charade. One night she came home late again, and I decided to confront her on her behavior. I asked her point blank if she was still seeing Mr. Thompson. She rolled her eyes, dismissing my concerns with a wave of her hand. "You're being ridiculous. I told you he's just a friend, you'll see." It was infuriating. The more she lied, the more determined I became to cut her out of my life entirely. A week later, after some back and forth with the bank, I got pre-approved for a mortgage. It felt surreal, like I was finally taking control of my destiny. I visited the house I had seen online, and my heart raced as I walked through the front door. It smelled like fresh paint, and the sun streamed through the windows, illuminating every corner. This was it. I could envision my life here, dogs running in the yard and no more lies hanging thick in the air. I made an offer that same day, and it was accepted. I couldn't believe how quickly things were falling into place. It was like the universe was conspiring to give me a fresh start. I began packing my things, all while keeping my game face on around Jessica. I had no intention of letting her see any sign of my plans. When I finally told her I was moving out, the reaction was explosive. "What do you mean you're moving out? You can't just leave. We're married," she screamed, her voice dripping with indignation. "Are you going to leave me for that landlord?" I stood there, arms crossed, feeling the power shift back to me. "No, Jessica, I'm leaving because you've betrayed me in every conceivable way. I deserve better than this." Her face twisted in anger, and I could see the realization washing over her that she had underestimated my resolve. As the days passed, I finalized the sale of my new house and planned my move. I had a date set for the end of the month, and I was determined to move out without another word to her. I could hardly wait to be free of her presence and the constant reminders of her deceit. I pictured myself closing the door behind me, stepping into a new life, and leaving her behind. The day of the move arrived, and I was a whirlwind of emotions. Part of me felt guilty for leaving, but that guilt quickly dissipated as I thought of all the lies and manipulation. I hired professional movers to help with the heavy lifting. As they packed my belongings, I could see Jessica growing more frantic. "You don't have to do this. We can work on things," she pleaded, desperation creeping into her voice. But there was no working on things. I was done. I felt like a weight was being lifted off my shoulders as I watched my things being loaded into the truck. Once we finished, I took one last look at the house that had been filled with so many memories, some good but mostly tainted by betrayal. The last thing I wanted was to be married to a woman who would choose a sleazy landlord over me. When the movers finished unloading my belongings into my new house, I stood there, taking it all in. This was my fresh start, a chance to rebuild my life. I had freed myself from the lies and deceit. I felt a sense of triumph I hadn't felt in months. Jessica had tried to break me, but instead, she had inadvertently given me the motivation to rise from the ashes. As I settled in, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had transpired. I realized that this experience taught me valuable lessons about trust, self-worth, and the importance of standing up for myself. I knew I would emerge stronger and more resilient than ever, ready to embrace whatever came next. Moving into the new house felt liberating. The air was different, fresher, lighter. I finally had a space that was free of Jessica's deceit, a blank canvas for me to paint my own life. The first week was a whirlwind of unpacking and setting up my new space, but with each box I opened, I felt more at home. I hung up pictures of my family, placed my favorite books on the shelves, and let the dogs run wild in the yard. They seemed to sense the shift too, their excitement reflecting my own newfound freedom. But as I settled into my new life, I couldn't help but feel a pull towards revenge. I wasn't just going to walk away from this situation without making Jessica feel the consequences of her actions. She had treated me like a fool, and now it was time for her to realize that. I was no longer the man she could manipulate. I started by gathering evidence of her affair, documenting everything I could. I didn't want to just tell her that she was losing me. I wanted her to fully grasp the impact of her betrayal. I saved copies of text messages I had seen on her phone, receipts for dinners I knew she had with Mr. Thompson, and anything else that would paint a clear picture of her unfaithfulness. I planned to reveal it all in the most public way possible. As the weeks passed, Jessica became increasingly frantic. She tried to reach out, calling and texting multiple times, but I was determined to keep my distance. I wanted her to stew in her own guilt, to feel the void I had left behind. Her messages became desperate, full of apologies and promises to change. "We can make this work. I want to fix things." She'd write, but I ignored her pleas. Every time I saw another message, I felt a rush of satisfaction. She was losing control, and it was glorious. One night, I decided to shake things up further. I invited a few friends over to the new house for a small get-together. I wanted to celebrate my new beginning, and I knew Jessica would find out. I posted pictures on social media, capturing moments of laughter and camaraderie, making sure to tag my location. It was the perfect bait. Sure enough, within hours, I received a call from Jessica. "You're throwing a party at that dump of a house. Who do you think you are?" She spat, her voice dripping with disdain. I could almost picture her pacing back and forth, her frustration boiling over. It was exactly the reaction I wanted. "Jessica, this isn't your business anymore. You made your choices, and now I'm making mine," I replied, calm and collected. Her anger only fueled my resolve. I could feel her losing her grip, and it felt fantastic. The following week, I decided it was time to execute the final phase of my plan. I had gathered all the evidence I needed, and it was time to confront her one last time. I arranged to meet her at a local cafe, a neutral ground where I could present my case. I wanted her to see how serious I was about walking away from her, and how her actions had consequences. When I arrived, Jessica was already seated, her makeup done perfectly, trying to maintain an air of confidence. She looked like the same woman I had married, but I knew the truth that lay beneath her facade. I sat down across from her, my heart racing with a mix of anticipation and a touch of regret. This was it. "Thanks for meeting me," I began, my tone steady. "I wanted to talk to you about everything, your affair, our marriage, and what's next." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on, can't we just forget about all this? I told you I would fix it. You're just being stubborn," she said, her voice defensive. "No, Jessica, I'm not being stubborn. I've seen the truth, and I can't unsee it," I replied, interrupting her. I pulled out the evidence I had gathered, a stack of receipts and screenshots of messages, and pushed it across the table towards her. "This is what you've done. You've ruined our marriage, and I'm done. I'm filing for divorce." Her face paled as she glanced at the documents, her bravado crumbling. "You don't mean that. We can work through this." "I'll do anything, please," she pleaded, desperation flooding her voice. "No, you won't. You had your chance. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed the trust we built over years. I'm moving on, and you need to accept that," I said firmly, feeling empowered with each word. The cafe was buzzing with chatter, but in that moment it felt like we were the only two people in the world. Jessica's mask of confidence slipped away completely as she realized the gravity of what was happening. I could see the myriad of emotions washing over her: shock, anger, and ultimately fear. "I can't believe you're doing this. You're throwing away everything we built together," she exclaimed, her voice rising. "No, you're the one who threw it away. I'm just picking up the pieces and moving forward," I said, my heart heavy but resolute. As I left that cafe, I felt a mix of triumph and sadness. I had finally stood up for myself and confronted the truth. I had made it clear that her actions had real consequences. I was no longer the man who would accept lies and deceit. I was someone who knew his worth and was not afraid to claim it. I realized in that moment that I had not only freed myself from Jessica, but also from the toxic grip of her betrayal. The path ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to embrace it, eager to see what life had in store for me beyond the pain. After that fateful meeting at the cafe, a sense of liberation washed over me. I had finally taken control of my life, and it felt invigorating. I was moving towards a future that was mine and mine alone. The divorce proceedings were daunting, but I approached them with a newfound strength. I secured a lawyer and we began drafting the necessary paperwork. The more I got involved in the process, the more I felt empowered. I was reclaiming my life piece by piece. Jessica, on the other hand, was not handling the situation as gracefully as I had hoped. The aftermath of our confrontation left her scrambling. She bombarded me with texts and calls, pleading for another chance, insisting that she could change. But I stood firm. I had seen the truth behind her facade, and I refused to let her manipulate me again. With every message she sent, I felt a surge of satisfaction. She was feeling the consequences of her actions, and I was ready to let her stew in it. One evening, I was sitting in my new living room, the dog sprawled out at my feet when I received a call from my lawyer. "I'm afraid I have some bad news," he said. My stomach dropped at the tone of his voice. "It seems Jessica has decided to fight for more than just the house. She's claiming emotional distress and wants a larger settlement." I clenched my jaw, the anger bubbling to the surface. Is she serious? After everything she's done, I couldn't believe the audacity. What's the next step? Unfortunately, this might mean the process will take longer than anticipated. We might have to head to court if she doesn't back down, he explained. My heart raced at the thought of facing her in a courtroom, but I knew I wouldn't back down. I wouldn't let her twist the narrative. I was ready to fight for what I deserved. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself preparing for an emotional battle. I gathered all the evidence I had collected and organized it meticulously for my lawyer. I was determined to make sure that the truth was laid bare in front of a judge. Jessica was not going to win this. I refused to let her rewrite our story. During this time, my friends were incredibly supportive. They helped me navigate the emotional turmoil and reminded me that I was not alone. One friend in particular, Jake, became my rock. He had been through a similar situation and offered me invaluable advice. "Just remember, man, you're fighting for your future. Don't let her drag you down," he said, his tone serious yet encouraging. With Jake's support and my growing determination, I began to feel a sense of resolve. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was also fighting to reclaim my self-worth. I started to focus on self-improvement. I hit the gym regularly, took up new hobbies, and even considered a short trip to clear my mind. I wanted to emerge from this experience as a stronger version of myself. Then came the day of the court hearing. I walked into the courthouse, my heart pounding in my chest, but I held my head high. I was ready to face Jessica, ready to confront the woman who had shattered my trust. I had spent countless nights rehearsing what I would say, how I would present my case, and the emotions I needed to channel. This was my moment. As I settled into the courtroom, I could feel the tension in the air. Jessica arrived looking as polished as ever, but I could see the cracks in her facade. She glanced at me, and for a brief moment our eyes locked. I felt a mix of anger and pity. How could someone I once loved so deeply turn into a stranger? The hearing began, and my lawyer presented the evidence methodically. I watched as Jessica's expressions shifted from defiance to worry. She had always been good at playing the victim, but now the reality of her actions was being laid out for all to see. The receipts, the messages, they painted a clear picture of her betrayal, and I felt a sense of satisfaction as the judge listened intently. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath and recounted my experience of the past few months. I shared how her infidelity had shattered my sense of self and trust. I looked directly at her, allowing my emotions to surface. "You turned our marriage into a lie, and all I wanted was honesty. I didn't deserve the way you treated me," I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. The judge asked both of us questions, and I could see Jessica squirming as she tried to justify her actions. She had no real defense. Her attempts at spinning the narrative fell flat, and I felt a sense of victory as the judge nodded, clearly not buying her excuses. After what felt like an eternity, the hearing concluded. As we walked out of the courtroom, I could feel Jessica's eyes boring into my back. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I had faced her, laid bare the truth, and I was ready to move on. A few days later, I received word from my lawyer. The judge had ruled in my favor. I was awarded the house, and Jessica would receive a fair settlement, but nothing close to what she had hoped for. Relief washed over me, mixed with a deep sense of accomplishment. I had not only fought for my rights, but also for my dignity. As I stood in my new living room, reflecting on everything that had transpired, I realized that this experience had reshaped me. I had been tested, pushed to my limits, but I had emerged on the other side stronger and more resilient than I had ever been. I was ready to embrace my new life, leaving the past behind and looking forward to the future. The lessons learned would stay with me forever, and I was determined to make the most of every moment. The ruling had given me a sense of closure, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life. I stood in my living room, a mixture of relief and contemplation washing over me. The house was finally mine, free from the shadows of my past with Jessica. I felt the weight on my shoulders lift, but the journey towards healing was just beginning. After the court ruling, I decided that it was time to focus on rebuilding my life. I threw myself into work, diving into projects I had set aside during my tumultuous marriage. I also made a point to reconnect with friends I had lost touch with, those who had been supportive during my separation. It felt good to be surrounded by positive influences, reminding me of who I was before everything fell apart. One Friday night, I invited a few friends over for a small gathering. I wanted to celebrate not just my new house, but also the freedom that came with it. Jake was among the guests, and he brought along a few friends of his own. The evening was filled with laughter and camaraderie, and I found myself easing into the joy of companionship once again. As the night wore on, one of Jake's friends, Sarah, caught my eye. She was smart, funny, and had a warmth that drew me in. Throughout the evening, we found ourselves gravitating towards one another, engaging in deep conversation while the others chatted and enjoyed the evening. It felt nice to connect with someone who had no ties to my past, a breath of fresh air that I desperately needed. After a few hours, as the party began to wind down, Sarah and I exchanged numbers. I felt a flutter of excitement as I realized I was ready to explore this connection further. It was a small step, but it symbolized a shift in my mindset. I was no longer the man defined by betrayal. I was becoming someone new, someone worthy of love and happiness again. The following week, Sarah and I planned a casual dinner. We met at a cozy restaurant, and as we sat across from one another, I couldn't help but notice how easy it was to talk to her. We shared our stories, our aspirations, and I found myself laughing more than I had in months. For the first time since the divorce, I felt a glimmer of hope for the future. As our relationship began to blossom, I was careful to pace myself. I still had lingering emotions from my past, and I didn't want to rush headlong into something without fully processing what I had gone through. Sarah was understanding, and her patience allowed me to open up about my experiences. I shared the story of my marriage, the infidelity, and how it had affected me. Instead of recoiling, she listened intently, offering support without judgment. With each passing day, I found myself more captivated by her. She had a way of making me feel seen and valued. Stark contrast to the feelings of inadequacy I had felt with Jessica. Our relationship grew steadily, filled with laughter and moments of vulnerability. I began to believe that I could truly be happy again. However, as my new life unfolded, there were moments when the shadows of my past crept back in. I occasionally received texts from Jessica, each one more desperate than the last. "I miss you. We could try again," she would write, but I simply ignored her messages. I had made my choice and I was standing firm. I couldn't let her pull me back into the web of lies and deceit. One evening, I received a call from my lawyer. "I wanted to inform you that Jessica has filed for an appeal regarding the settlement," he said, his tone serious. I felt a surge of irritation. How could she still not understand that this was over? I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "What do we do now?" I asked, already preparing for another round in the courtroom. "It means we'll have to gather more evidence to solidify the ruling. We'll fight this, but it could take some time," he explained. I felt the anger bubbling inside me again. It seemed like Jessica was determined to keep dragging this out. But I knew I wouldn't back down. As I prepared for yet another legal battle, I leaned on Sarah for support. She helped me process my feelings, reminding me that I had already proven my strength once and could do so again. With her by my side, I felt more equipped to face Jessica's relentless attempts to reclaim a life that she had willingly discarded. In the following weeks, I dug deep into my evidence, organizing every detail again for my lawyer. I was determined to ensure that the judge saw Jessica for who she really was, a woman who had made choices and now wanted to avoid the consequences. Each night after I worked on my case, I would come home to Sarah, her warm embrace comforting me and reminding me of the love and happiness I now had. The day of the appeal hearing arrived, and I was ready. As I walked into the courthouse, the familiar nerves crept back in, but I reminded myself of how far I had come. This was about more than just a house or a settlement. It was about standing up for myself and ensuring that my future was not tethered to someone who had betrayed me. The hearing unfolded similarly to the last. My lawyer presented our case, and I watched as Jessica attempted to paint herself as the wronged party. But I stood firm in my truth, recounting my experiences and the impact of her infidelity. I could see it in the judge's eyes, the disbelief and frustration at Jessica's continued attempts to manipulate the situation. When it was finally over, I sat outside the courtroom, heart pounding as I awaited the judge's ruling. This was it, final stand. As I waited, I felt Sarah's hand on my shoulder, grounding me, reminding me that no matter the outcome, I had already won in many ways. After what felt like an eternity, we were called back inside. The judge delivered the ruling, affirming the previous decision. Jessica's appeal was denied. Relief washed over me, and I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders once again. I had faced my past head-on and emerged victorious. As I left the courthouse, I felt lighter than ever. The final barriers between me and my new life had been dismantled. I turned to Sarah, who was waiting for me outside, her eyes sparkling with pride and joy. We embraced, and in that moment I knew that I was ready to fully embrace the future, a future filled with love, hope, and the promise of new beginnings. With the appeal denied, I felt an overwhelming sense of freedom wash over me. As I walked out of the courthouse, hand in hand with Sarah, I couldn't help but smile. The past few months had tested me in ways I never imagined possible, but I had come out on the other side stronger than ever. It was a bittersweet victory, knowing the pain I had endured, but now I was ready to move forward with my life. In the weeks that followed, I focused on settling into my new life and enjoying every moment of it. Sarah and I spent more time together, exploring the city, going on hikes, and simply enjoying each other's company. I realized how much I had missed the joy of companionship, and with Sarah, I felt a sense of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. She brought out a side of me that I thought was lost forever. As I immersed myself in this fresh start, I also made a point to reflect on the lessons I had learned throughout this journey. I realized that the betrayal I had faced with Jessica had forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about myself. It had propelled me towards self-discovery, a journey I had avoided for far too long. I learned the importance of setting boundaries, valuing my self-worth, and recognizing the kind of love I truly deserved. One sunny Saturday, I decided to host a housewarming party to celebrate my new beginning. I invited friends, including Jake and Sarah, who had become my pillars of support. The atmosphere was filled with laughter and warmth, a stark contrast to the tense gatherings I used to have with Jessica. It felt amazing to surround myself with people who genuinely cared about me and uplifted my spirit. As the night wore on, I found myself standing on the patio, sipping a drink and watching my friends mingle. I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had led me here. Yes, there had been pain and heartbreak, but those experiences had forged a new version of me, one that was resilient and ready for whatever life had in store. As I shared stories and laughter with my friends, I noticed Sarah approaching me, a smile lighting up her face. "Hey, can I steal you for a moment?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. I followed her to a quieter corner of the patio, away from the noise of the party. "I just wanted to say how proud I am of you," she said, her voice sincere. "You've come so far, and it's incredible to see you thriving after everything you've been through." Her words resonated deeply, and I felt a swell of emotion. "Thank you, Sarah. I couldn't have done it without your support. You've been such a breath of fresh air in my life." I replied, my heart full. We shared a moment of silence, simply enjoying each other's presence. It was in that moment that I realized how far I had come, not just in terms of moving on from Jessica, but in opening my heart to new possibilities. I leaned in and kissed her softly, feeling a warmth spread through me. It was gentle, sweet, and a perfect reflection of where we were together. As the party continued, I looked around at the people in my life, the friends who had stood by me, the new connections I was forging, and the love that was blossoming with Sarah. I realized I had been given a second chance, not just at love, but at life itself. I no longer felt burdened by the weight of the past. Instead, I was filled with hope and optimism for the future. In the months that followed, Sarah and I grew closer. We traveled together, explored new places, and shared countless experiences that deepened our bond. I found myself opening up to her in ways I had never imagined. It felt right, and she encouraged me to embrace my experiences, both the good and the bad. She understood that my past shaped me, but it didn't have to define my future. Looking back, I realized that the painful journey I had endured was ultimately a catalyst for growth. I had emerged from the ashes of betrayal stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. I learned that love is not just about romance. It's about mutual respect, trust, and supporting one another through thick and thin. Reflecting on my experiences, I wanted to share my story for anyone who might find themselves in a similar situation. Life can throw unexpected challenges our way, but it's how we respond that defines our future. Healing takes time, but it's possible. Always remember to prioritize your self-worth and never settle for less than you deserve. As I stood there, under the stars with friends and the woman who had helped me rediscover my joy, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I was ready for whatever paths lay ahead because I now knew that I could create the life I wanted. With love, support, and resilience, anything was possible. The future was bright, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms.